Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I have with me here the highly requested Mr. OG del Rancho. Quite a few of you guys, have been asking me, yo, you should interview OG, you should interview Rancho. So I finally have him here. We're going to have a little one-on-one interview. And, as I do with most of my interviews, we're going to ask little questions about his background and then just some of the content that he speaks about on his channel. So how do you want me to refer to you? Should I call you OG? Should I call you Rancho? Should I call you your name?
You can call me by my name. You can call me Noel, or you can call me Rancho. It seems people just started calling me Rancho. So
yeah.
Either of those work.
Okay, I'll just call you by your name then. You have been on YouTube. How long have you been on YouTube now?
Like 2 months.
Okay, wow, it's only been 2 months, man.
I know, man, COVID time.
Okay, so it seems like you kind of came onto everyone's radar after you did that interview with Antonio, Andy, whatever his name is. I guess his real name is Andy.
Andy,
So that's kind of how I found out who you were as well.
Right.
But I do want to ask first, before we get onto your channel, just a little bit about your background. So you are from Nicaragua, right?
Soy Nicoya. I was born and raised in LA, but since I was 4, I basically spent every summer in Nicaragua. And then there was breaks in my life where I spent, like 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half there. So I've had a foot in both places my whole life. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I don't really know much about Nicaragua. I don't really even know any people from Nicaragua around here. What would you say are, So what would you say are some aspects of what Nicaraguan culture that people should know about? Whether it be, music, dance, food, just anything that maybe people don't know that we should know.
I would describe Nicaragua like, literally, if you look on the map, it's in the middle of Colombia and Mexico, and it's in the middle of Cuba. So it's like a triangle forms, and Nicaragua's in the middle.
Okay.
So that's how I would describe Nicaragua. It's a mix of Mexico, Cuba, and Colombia.
Really?
Yeah. So it's very Caribbean, but it's also part of the mainland, and it has like very much of like agricultural ethos, like all countries in Hispanoamerica, really. But so we kind of get that influence of Mexico, and at the same time, because we're more Caribbean, so it's more of a Colombian type of mix to it, So that's how I would describe it. It's a very small country. It's very small population. Very underpopulated country. But it's a country that, even though it's small, it has a very kind of colored history, because of the war. Really is probably what most people know is the Sandinistas. We're very much like a fighting people, most people might not know Nicaraguans, but I think if they do, one of the things they might recognize about them is that maybe kind of like, the fighting Irish had this reputation for being kind of feisty, fighty people. I would describe Nicaraguans something like that. We're bravo, you know what I mean? Like where if we run out of bullets, we'll chuck rocks at you, but we won't stop fighting.
Interesting. Okay, and the people of Nicaragua, they're mostly like mestizo, right? Like European indigenous mix. I mean, I know there's some Garifuna in Nicaragua too, but for the most part, would you say it's mestizo people?
No, I would say it's really. I've traveled a lot throughout Hispanoamerica because work. I've been fortunate enough to I've been able to get to the Andes, to the Southern Cone, to the Caribbean, to Mexico extensively. And I would say Nicaragua was probably one of the most like evenly distributed countries where it's very triracial. You know what I mean? It's very indio, blanco, y negro. And I would say you find as much blancos as you find negros, as you find indios, but most people are a mix of all three. It's a very, very mixed country. So you'll find people who like might have green eyes and light skin and light hair, but they'll have like an Indio face. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or you'll like, you'll find all those different variations between the three races, the three racial groups. there's very few kind of pure people on all three, but there are, you know, you do see them, but it's just not, most people are a mix, a gradient, you know, and it works out real funny because among siblings, you know, like I have my sister looks very India. My sister looks kind of like Pocahontas, you know what I mean?
Oh.
I have another brother who looks like a white dude. He looks like a whiter version of me. So it's just very, very, very mixed. I wouldn't characterize it like Mexico, where the assumption's more that everybody's mestizo, or in the Caribbean, people have a black influence. I would say it's really, really evenly mixed. And then even you mentioned the Garifunas. They're one section of the black population. There's other black groups, right? It's not just the Garifuna. There's a Miskito. Then we also had a lot of Jamaicans come. Last 100 years or so. And so the East Coast of Nicaragua kind of feels like a mix of kind of like that Colombia Mexico mix meets Jamaica. So people on the East Coast speak English or they speak kind of like a Creole kind of patois English, you know what I mean? Because the East Coast was, for some time, the English controlled that area. And so even the Indios and even the mestizos from that area all have English last names.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
They'll speak English at home. Yeah. And then they learn Spanish as they go to school and they kind of move around the country. But most of the populations is on we're in Central America, we're in the middle. We face the Caribbean, and then to our back is the Pacific. But most of the population, even before the Spanish came, lived around the Pacific region. So there's the Pacific, there's mountains in the middle, and then there's the Caribbean lowlands. But most of the population's on the Pacific. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Like I said, it's a mix of those things. It's very, you feel like the marimba, you feel like the conga drums, you feel the accordion and the Spanish guitar. Like it is very quintessential mix of what you would expect from that region.
Gotcha.
And you're Dominican, right? I mean, obviously, yes. What part of Dominican Republic are you from?
Well, I was born here in the States, but my parents were born like right in the center of the country in a town called Bonao. So yeah, that's where they were born. And then my dad's side all kind of ended up migrating to the capital.
Oh, of course.
So yeah, I've always kind of been back and forth between those two areas.
Yeah, in LA, growing up in LA, I didn't really know that many Dominicans. Like the closest thing to Dominicans we got was like merengue music, growing up. Obviously, a main course of the music we listened to at family parties, which were a big chunk of life as a kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But personally, I never really knew any Dominicans till way later in life, till I got to my 20s, and I met these two Dominican sisters who grew up in LA and ended up moving to New York. So I met them in New York, actually. I never even met them in LA.
Oh, okay.
Which was weird. You don't really find Dominicans out here, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience here too in Virginia. There's not a whole lot of us here either. So,
and you grew up in Virginia?
I've been in Virginia my whole life. Yeah. Yep. So I didn't grow up with that New York Dominican experience. I grew up around a bunch of Salvadoricos and stuff. So
I was gonna say, I was gonna assume that you had a lot of Salvadorians around you.
Yes, a whole lot.
I would say Salvadorians are like very similar to Nicaraguans, but with El Salvador, they're a Pacific country. They don't have a Caribbean.
Yeah.
So it's like missing that Afro Black Caribbean tinge to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which makes it a little bit different. Yeah.
Right. One of my best friends is from there, and I mean, she's told me, well, if you go to El Salvador, you're gonna be like one of the only Black people in my town. Like everybody would definitely look at you.
I don't know. Like, They probably look at you because you're pretty, But yeah, no, I knew a lot of Salvadorians growing up in LA. Of course, they're the second biggest group here after Mexicans. And it's rare to see, and it's not rare, but it's rarer to see the kind of Afro mix into Salvadorians.
Yeah.
it's there. It's, you know, I have a cousin who's married to a Salvadorian guy who's like 6'4", blonde. He looks German, but when you look at him for a minute, you notice his hair is real kinky, and it's like you can still see the Africa in him. You know what I mean? Like it's so yeah. It's not, again, they didn't have a Caribbean, so it wasn't as, you know, it wasn't as big of an influence as it was in say Nicaragua or Colombia or the islands, of course.
Yeah. So, Noel, I want to now get a little bit more into your channel and what your content is about. Sure. So I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts now, and they're very interesting. You guys definitely seem very knowledgeable on a lot of things, whether it's current events or even a lot of the historical aspects of things that have happened in Latin America. And I mean, all of you guys, at least the regulars that I hear, you guys all seem very educated. And I was very surprised to hear in one of your last podcasts that Haniel is only 19. I was like, what? Dang. He knows a lot for being 19.
Yeah, there's a few guys. Yeah, no, I've been really blessed to be able to connect. You know, I got on Twitter originally last year before the whole COVID thing because I was working on a business project, and I said, okay, let me use Twitter to network with people. And then COVID came, and then it was like, I guess my personality started to slip out. It wasn't so much business. It was me just kind of connecting on things I was actually interested in. And then with the whole race riots that started to kick out, and that whole thing, the whole racial tensions that really started to come out, I really realized, like, I'm not black, I'm not white, at least in the American sense of those words. Yeah, and I'm like, this, I can't get into this dialectic. You know what I'm saying? And so then I grew up in Inglewood. You know, so I had a lot of black friends growing up. I still do. You know what I mean? Even my family adopted a little black kid from Sierra Leone for a long time. He's virtually family. Yeah. So I grew up with that, and I went to high school in a really nice area, so I got to know white people really well too. And so then it's like, from my perspective, I started realizing, like, these people are a lot more alike than they like to admit. You know, they actually have a lot more in common. People? White and black people, white and black Americans. You know, and so I started to realize, like, it's not really black and white; it's really gringo and Hispano. And that's not really a racial designation. I'm talking more about culture or civilization, right? Because we have blacks, whites, we have everything in between, as the gringos do, right? And I think black Americans have a really hard time understanding themselves as American, but black Americans are American. You know, I always make a joke with my black American friends, and I'm like, when your ass goes to Africa, you're gonna see how white American you are. You know what I mean? It's gonna
I've heard a few people say that, actually.
Yeah, you're gonna look like the white guy to the Africans, because, you know, you're not gonna be in the same vibe. You're not gonna run around the same way, and that's really where it shows. So I think here in this country, you know, these two groups have, unfortunately, a very tense, sordid history with each other, and I think it's really unfortunate. And, you know, and again, I contrast it to Hispanoamerica, and though there's been, you know, injustices and crimes and all that stuff, but that Hispanos don't, what I've noticed is Hispanos don't really characterize themselves by those things, right? We kind of see there was like a greater good, I guess, at the end of the day for it. At least even reluctantly we'll admit to that. And so I noticed, like, no, there's a huge difference between, you know, all the black Cubans I grew up around and all the black Americans, including, again, I have a little brother from Sierra Leone, and there's a clear difference, you know, between him and African Americans. And so then I started to realize, okay, then it's not just purely racial. There is a really important cultural worldview aspect to this. And so as I kind of started, you know, realizing that, and what I started to do on Twitter was really just sharing more about Hispano culture and worldview. Like, you know, the fact that we're, you know, I'm triracial. I don't know if you can see all the races in me, but like I had told Paula one day, like, if you look at me from a certain angle, you'll spot it. You know what I mean? It's real funny that when I put green contacts on, I end up looking more mulatto than I do white. Really? It's just like a real, Yeah, it's a really weird effect that I don't know, for some reason it works out that way. But so I started exposing that, and I started sharing it with, African American friends of mine on Twitter, and they kind of realized like, huh, you're right. Like, if this country developed under the culture that we know that you share with us, things would have turned out really differently. Right. And I think we're at like a crossroads historically where we can really compare and contrast. Like, why did Hispanoamerica develop the way it did, within its racial dynamics?
Yeah.
And why did the United States develop Anglo-America, right? It's really important to understand that. And so kind of investigating that and sharing that is really what kind of started bringing all these very interesting people to me, from all over Hispanoamerica, and even Europe as well. Because I've connected with people, Europeans who've lived in Hispanoamerica, and, they kind of share what they've observed. And so, I've been able to connect with people like, you mentioned Haniel, but there's tons of guys who are just really, really high caliber, really intelligent young men, really impressive professionals. And I'm just impressed because, as I've been putting content out, I just keep hearing like, thank you, thank you for finally kind of putting words to the way I always saw the world and the way I've always felt and the way I was raised, but finally being able to express it in words, which I think in the contemporary American conversation, our perspective is completely left out, which I'm perfectly fine with. But my whole thing is, we Hispanos, we need to know our perspective. We need to know what informs our world. Why is it that, again, at a family reunion, we're going to have people of my complexion, your complexion, maybe a freckly redhead kid, and everything in between? Why does it work out that way? And so that's really what the channel is about. It's about kind of reconnecting Hispanos in the diaspora in the United States back to their roots, and give them, in a sense, the intellectual tools to really understand their roots, right? Because we all live this truth, we all live this reality, but it's not really part of the dialogue. So it's like, when the blacks and the whites are fighting each other, we're kind of like, whose side should I get on? Am I really supposed to take a side? And really, my whole thing, and it's not necessarily because I have an agenda, but it's just me being dispassionate and honest about what I see. I really see the dialectic is not black and white. It's Hispano and Gringo. Once you zoom out of the United States and really look at the continent as a whole, and when you look at history, that's really what shows forth that for all the racial tensions amongst white and black Americans, at the end of the day, if a fight really breaks out between America and Hispanos, black Americans are going to take the white American side. And when you look into the statistics, when you look into the history, it's really what's shown. And I think even when you look into the general sentiment of people just having everyday conversations on Twitter or Instagram, you kind of see some of this. I don't know if I hate to use these type of terms, but you kind of see some of this Hispanophobia, amongst both of them. And again, it's like all of a sudden they kind of coalesce. When it's just them two, they're at each other's heads. But once this third comes in, it's almost like they also realize, like, oh, we're different too. There is something in common. Right. There is something, I think, worldview. Again, I like to connect it to worldview that makes them different from both of us. And I'm talking about Hispanos, right? I'm talking from their perspective. And so that's really the ball, the snowball of my YouTube channel. It's just kind of taking those conversations and there's really no format. One of the things that I really had been able to emphasize on Twitter before I got to YouTube was what I call Momento Hispano. Because
that was going to be one of my questions, because I see you use that a lot, like El Momento Hispano. So I was going to ask you, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So El Momento Hispano is just looking at a demographic snapshot of not just the United States, but again, the Americas as a whole. And what you see demographically and economically, I think is something that Hispanos should really know about themselves, because what you notice is that basically for every one Anglo, or just kind of a generic white American, doesn't have to necessarily be Anglo, could be Irish or just an assimilated white American. Mm-hmm. For every one of them, there's almost 4 Hispanos. Okay. And the average age of that one white guy is 58 years old. So he's pushing 60. Whereas the average age of these 4 Hispano brothers is 22. So you realize, like, you know, I'm somebody who's very familiar with our history, not just the 200 years that we've been these independent republics, but the 300 years prior to that as an empire. And we've shared a little bit about that, you know, when I've come on your channel. Mm-hmm. And if you understand that history, you understand really, if you look at it, the dynamic supports what I'm saying, that the tension here is Anglo-Hispano. It's not really as black and white. I think black and white is overly simplistic, and it makes sense in the rural South and the eastern seaboard of the United States, because that's all there was there, right? You were either white or you were black. Mm-hmm. But once America expanded and moved into the Spanish domain, then all of a sudden there's like this third position opens up, and it's been like that for a while. But again, it's like these two worlds didn't really talk to each other. It's like they tolerated each other, but they've never really been able to understand each other fully. And I think me being a Nicaragüense born in the United States and kind of being able to grow around America and work in America, and I know this country very well. I've been able to travel all over this country extensively. I'm able to kind of provide a unique perspective on that. You know, I'm kind of able to help white and black Americans maybe understand themselves in ways they didn't understand themselves before. And I think the feedback from them has actually really been positive. Overall, people have kind of appreciated it, you know, to hear things from, it's kind of like, you know, a friend who finally tells you like, hey, you got something between your teeth. You know what I mean? Like, it's refreshing. It might be off-putting at first, but then you kind of realize like, oh, somebody's actually being honest with me out of kindness. Mm-hmm. And again, because I grew up with blacks, it's like, and, you know, my culture is black. I may not look black, but, you know, my soul has that blackness to it. And I'm very proud of my African descendancy. You know what I mean? Like, extremely proud. Mm-hmm. For you to take that away from me is like for you to take away my arm or my leg. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't be complete. And I think that's the same true for all Hispanoamerica. You know, what I've noticed is that there's this kind of tension developing with this whole kind of concept of Afro-Latino. And what I'm seeing is like African Americans imposing their definition of blackness as if they have the copyright on what black is, right? But they're just one group out of Africa, but they put themselves in a dominant position to be able to dictate what black is. And what you notice is that whites do the exact same shit. So it's like, if you're white, all of a sudden, even though I'm Polish or Croatian or English or Scottish, but all of a sudden, all the glory of Russia and Spain is mine too. You know, it's like, wait a minute. No, Europe isn't a monolithic white, just like Africa isn't this monolithic black. You know what I mean? And the same thing with the diaspora from these places. So it's really funny to me because what you see is like, it's like big country syndrome. You know, it's like the big countries think the whole world is the big country. The people from little countries realize that there's other countries next to them. So they have a different like take on the world. You know what I mean? Like, the experience for Dominicans and Cubans is going to be different from Mexicans, who, it's a big country. It's a huge population. They think, well, basically the world is Mexico. So United States really has that issue. Countries like Russia and China also have that, right? Whereas like Western Europe, you know, it's like you have Belgium and France. And for somebody from the outside thinks, oh, those are the same place. But it's like, no, we're different. So the United States has this issue of trying to clump people into this false dialectic. And I think it's not working because it's not real, right? There's more than two choices, right? It's not just black and white. And I think one people that really prove that is Hispanos. And so to loop it back to what is a Momento Hispano, I mentioned to you that demographic snapshot. but there's also a huge economic component to that, right? If we understood the power economically that Hispanoamerica has, and I don't just mean south of the border, I mean the Hispanos here as well, you know, it's huge. It's actually a bigger economy than the United States. You know what I mean? And then when you compare that with what I know historically of the Spanish Empire, and you look at that economic picture, you realize like, actually, if you look at most of the time, we've been well off as a region and a people. So that's kind of what I try to put forth is that, you know, let's put away the gringo lenses, right? Let's stop looking at the world as black and white, and let's realize that there's something that unites us, right? There's something that unites you to me, to a Peruvian, an Argentinian, a Bolivian, and a Mexican, and everyone else in between, and Brazilians as well. And if we understood what are those things that united us, we start realizing like, damn, this really is a Momento Hispano. You know, we really are at the childbearing age. We really are in a position to kind of grab the reins of political and economic power in this continent. That's the reality. I mean, there's no ways around it. And I think when you take a moment, when you take a step back from that reality and you look at things from an American Anglo perspective, it's kind of scary. Because you realize that if I'm an average Anglo, I'm kind of, you know, I can see the end of the tunnel now. You know, I've already raised my kids, you know, good or bad. I think there's a lot to discuss about that. But here's these 4 brothers who just moved in next door to me, and they're strong and they're young, and you know, they got the whole world ahead of them. So then I think if I'm a nefarious person, if I'm a dishonest person, then my spin is, how do I divide these guys? How do I make that 4 one-on-one? And so then I'm going to start things where like, oh, you know what? You're not really liked. You're black. You're an Afro-Latino. You've been abused. And let me give you the Black American line, right? Let me program you with that. Oh, you're not really black or white. You're kind of indigenous. Okay, let me give you, again, this, what I like to call alchemy, right? It's like magic. Because when you clump things as white, you're basically saying that Anglos and Hispanos are the same, right? That the Spanish and the English are the same. And they're not. You know what I'm saying? And to be honest, they don't even look alike. You know, one looks more Mediterranean, one looks more Germanic. But beyond the look, just because they come from Europe doesn't mean, again, you have to understand how Christianity works into this whole thing, right? How kind of this ancient form of Christianity, you know, Catholic worldview contrasts itself with more of a Protestant evangelical worldview. And that may seem nebulous to a lot of people, but it does affect how you deal with other people. So when the English came here, they saw themselves as like kind of fully human, and the blacks and the Indians, no. But when the Spanish came here, they saw themselves as like, yeah, we're the shit, we're powerful. But you know what? At the end of the day, that's a human made in God's image. At the end of the day, this woman, whether she's black or Indian, has the dignity to be my wife, right? That's a very different worldview. And so you have to ask yourselves, what informs that worldview? And then what causes that effect? And I think the reality is, the sad reality is that Anglos have a better answer for these things that I'm sharing with you than Hispanos. In other words, Anglos know us better than we know ourselves. And I think the very elite of them, the ones who, you know, the old blue bloods, the ones that go to Yale, you know what I mean? Those types, they have a very clear picture. In fact, I can prove it because they write about it. They know that there's an issue coming demographically. They know that there's a tsunami here. And to think that some of these things, and I think, you know, this might explain a little bit why I reacted so viscerally to somebody like Rad Latino and Andy. Let's be fair, right? I have issues or beef with both of these guys because what you see is that they're both enforcing that dialectic. Andy is just doing it from the white side. Rad Latino is doing it from the black side. But those are false choices. Again, we're neither. We are Hispano. We are Latino, if you want to use that word. We're South American, Iberian American, whatever you want to call it. We're a whole other civilization. And if you understood the roots of that civilization, then you won't fall into these racial dialectics. Because, you know, I ask people, how can an Hispano be racist? Like in the American sense. Because again, I can marry somebody of my complexion and have children with her, and we might have a kid that looks like you. You know, that's a very famous, like, kind of running joke in Hispanoamérica. El negrito es el único tuyo, right? You've heard that song?
Right? I haven't actually. But
you've never heard that song? It's a Dominican song. It's well, I don't know if it's a Colombian song or Dominican song originally, but it's by Johnny Ventura, and Sonora Dinamita also sings it. But it's like Capullo y Zorrullo.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oye, Maruto, el negrito es el único.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I heard. Yeah.
For the viewer, basically, this song is about this like white lighter skinned guy who marries, like, you know, what's assumed a white lighter skinned girl, and you know they have a very happy marriage and they have like 8 kids. And they all came out like, you know, blonde and blue-eyed, and then there's this one black one. And, you know, at the end of their life, you know, the husband comes to the wife and says, like, honey, like, you know, I love all these kids. I raised them right. Like, I don't even care anymore. But tell me the truth. Is the black one mine? And the wife says, the black one's the only one that's yours.
Yeah. But you have that understanding, you know, so yeah, I mean, with your worldview, or, you know, it's easy to say, how could a Hispanic be racist? But you still come across Hispanics that are.
Sure.
You know, so.
But I think even in those cases, and this is one of the things that I'm realizing now, is that we have to find different terms. Because even when you find like the grandma who probably be on the darker side, the one that's telling you to get with a white guy, you know, it's like, to call it racism from an American Anglo perspective, an American experience, again, because the racial dynamics have been, I would say, awful in Anglo America when you compare them to Spanish America. And I think the facts are there. The historical facts are there. You can't dispute this and be honest. But when you call the experience of a black Southerner racist, and then you use that same word to describe the racial dynamics in the Caribbean basin, in the Spanish-speaking world, then I think you're not using the right word. You're painting with the same brush something that's different. Are there these racial tensions and dynamics, and do they kind of express themselves in quirky, funky ways? Yeah. Should we talk about them? Hell yeah. Let's expand on it. You know, let's have that conversation. But let's not let ourselves fall into the American trap of, oh, that's racist, and so now I got to react like a Black Panther from the 60s and 70s, even though my historical experience hasn't been anything like that. Right? My historical experience hasn't been anything like that. And again, that's not to say that there wasn't things worth mentioning and saying, hey, what about this clear example of abuse? Let's talk about those. Let's that's one of the things that I think the channel is progressing in, is really, we have to kind of unpack our history, because we've never really had an opportunity to unpack our history. Our history has been taught to us from an Anglo perspective, right? If we come to school here, Anglos teach you the history of you, but they have a historical bias against the Spanish. They were the
barely, if anything, because I feel like we were barely taught about Latin America in school.
Yeah, exactly. And what you were taught was built upon what's called the Black Legend, you know, and the Black Legend is basically painting Spain as this like evil priest who's coming to, the Inquisition's coming, and, you know, we're going to rape and pillage and do all these things. But we have to understand that where the Black Legend came from, it came from Spain's historical enemies. And now the contrast to that is what they call la leyenda rosa, the pink legend. And it's like, yeah, no, let's not be unrealistic and pretend that the Spanish were these angels sent from God. No, they're humans, man. We're all humans at the end of the day. But let's be honest, you know, let's show those historical examples of these clear injustices. But at the same time, let's show these historical examples that throw that line of discussion completely out the window. Because when you say that, oh, you know, blacks were treated just as bad in Spanish America, then how do you explain the black conquistadors who were given encomiendas by the Spanish crown, who were given lands and Indian peasants to work it, you know, who married Spanish women as early as 1502, right? So how are you telling me here that the racial dynamics of Hispanoamerica are exactly the same as the ones in Anglo-America, but yet these historical examples clearly refute that? And I think that's kind of a sad part of it, is that if there's anyone who should know about the role that Africans played in the conquista, because they were here from the very first boat, you know, it wasn't to think that it was Spanish who conquered the Americas is a very grade school explanation of history. You know, there was black conquistadors, there was black slaves on that boat who were like the assistants to these conquistadors, who after fighting in battle got their freedom and got lands and became prominent men of society.
So you wouldn't say that the black conquistadors were more of a minority or kind of like an exception to the rule? Because I mean, if you compare the number of black conquistadors to the number of enslaved Africans, like wouldn't that, I mean, isn't that a pretty big difference?
Well, that's part of the thing, right? So it's like when you look at the early phase of the conquest, the early phase, call it the first 10 to 30 years of Spaniards in the Americas. Mm-hmm. Most of the blacks weren't, you know, again, Africa belonged to the Portuguese, right? You have to remember that the Spanish and the Portuguese had a Treaty of Tordesillas. I believe that is what it was called. And they basically drew a line down the middle of the globe, and they said everything from this line to that side is yours. Everything from this side to that side is mine. So Africa belonged to the Portuguese. So the Spanish didn't start the Spanish never really brought blacks. It was the Portuguese, Sephardic traders, Anglos, who overwhelmingly brought blacks to the French, English, and Portuguese speaking parts of the Americas. Slavery didn't play as big of a role in Spanish America. Now, there are cases where it did, but again, the attitude was very different. So to answer your question real quickly, and I'll come back to this point about the conquistadors, yeah, of course, not every single African who arrived here, especially in the early phase, was a conquistador, but excuse me, in the early phase, overwhelmingly they were soldiers of fortune. Now, they may have had a lower status than the Spaniard, but at the end of the day, when the treasure is being divided amongst them, the Africans took their share too. Now, one of the things that you have to understand is what happened to these Africans. Well, they got themselves white wives or India wives, you know what I mean? And they kind of mixed themselves away. And that's the thing about Spanish America, right? Again, the joke is that I get with somebody of my complexion and I end up having this kid who looks way more African than my wife and I. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we carry that little 5% of the average Mexican, or that 20 to 30% of people from, you know, more South, that shows itself in very interesting ways. And it's not so much about what is the term? Physiology, phenotype necessarily, but it's in our soul. It's in our culture. It's in our music, right? Like nobody in Hispanoamerica can, you know, you're gonna get retards everywhere, right? Let's first realize that every group of people has retards, right? I don't mean to be offensive to people with Down syndrome. I'm talking about the other type of retard.
Yeah.
But you can't deny the African influence in Hispanoamerica. It's part of our culture. It's part of our swag. You know what I mean? Like, I invite me. There's a black family party or something, and invite me to the party, and you're gonna see how black I am when the music starts. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because it's in my soul. It's in my blood. I can't deny it. To deny it is, and that's again is the issue that I have with people like Andy, who try to deny or downplay it. But I think even if your African admixture is just 2, 3, 4%, you know, 2, 3, 4% of you or your body, if we took that away, it might be your eyeball. It might be something crucial to your functioning. And I get it. You know, historically, there have been these tensions of, you know, oh, we all want to be white because, again, they're the ones with the nice clothes and they're kind of calling the shots, not exclusively. And when you look at the historical record, it wasn't always the case. On the contrary, but that's been the sense, right? Obviously the Spanish were at the top of, and again, I even have a problem with me saying that because a peasant from Spain who came here after the conquest, right? So you have to understand the history, right? There was an initial phase of conquest. After the conquest and things were being settled, you had a lot of immigration. And those peasants who came didn't have more power than, say, that black conquistador or the grandson of that black conquistador or the Indio with a lot of money and influence in the last name too. You know, he was still a peasant. Just because and that's very different from America, Anglo-America, right? Where in Anglo-America, it didn't matter if you were like a wealthy or, you know, affluent class African. You were still at the bottom of the even a poor white trash, in a sense, had more power than you. That dynamic did not exist in Hispanoamerica. Now, that doesn't mean that blacks didn't seek to get to in a sense, get themselves a white girl, if you want to put it in those terms. And if you want to like start psychoanalyzing that and say, oh, that's repressed racism, internalized racism, whatever, blah, 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 blah. You know, whatever. Let's have that discussion. I'm really open to having that discussion. But again, the real clear thing that I'm trying to paint is that these two civilizations are very different at their roots, and they're very different in their flourishing. The fruits of the Hispano tree are, like I said, they carry those three roots in them, right? And they show themselves, and they show themselves mostly when we're together, right? Like a black Cuban could be black as night, but he's not going to go to the black neighborhood, the black American neighborhood. He's going to go to the Mexican neighborhood if he had to choose between those two, correct? Because there's something in our souls or something in our essence that does unite us regardless of what that skin is like. And so there's a reason why that fruit came out that way. And there's a reason why the Anglo-American fruit came out the way it did too, where you have these tensions that, you know, Lord knows if they ever cure themselves. And what's ironic is that where you see them cure themselves is when black and white gringos feel threatened by Hispanos. That's when all of a sudden black Americans become very American. You know, that's when you start hearing those type of things like, oh, we were here first and we've been bullied, so now we want to bully you. We want you to be the Negro. You know what I'm saying? You don't see that. You know, that you don't see that in Hispanoamerica. Blacks in Hispanoamerica don't have a historical chip on their shoulder. Right? Let's go to a spot in Panama or Colombia or Nicaragua, wherever. Let's look for the black neighborhood or the block or whatever. Let's pull 5 teenagers. And now the thing is, because of influence of social media and mass media, which all comes from the United States, that is changing. But that's because of influence from what we have to understand are historical enemies who see the 4 brothers next door at the peak of their age and feel threatened by it. And the last thing they want to do is lose the inheritance they've been accumulating and it not go to their grandson and it go to these 4 boys who are, you know, rough and tumble.
Well, I definitely agree with you with how you say that the way in which, you know, the United States versus the rest of Latin America developed, it is very different. And, you know, if you use the analogy of the 2 different trees and the fruits that they bore, yes, it is very different. And that is why you see, and this is something I've mentioned on my channel too, it's like when it comes to like the race issue, the United States racial classification was based on this dichotomy of white versus black, whereas in Latin America, it kind of evolved in like a spectrum between white and black and every mixture in between. Right. Now, as far as like the race relations or the way in which, you know, say black people were treated, I do agree that for the most part, it hasn't been like exactly the way like Black Americans' history here was. But I think we should also be careful not to paint it all with like one brush, though, because there were certain countries, specific countries, in which Black people were treated kind of bad. I mean, in Cuba, for example, you had segregation. Black people for in the 1800s, I think it was. I mean, they weren't even able to go to certain beaches. They weren't able to go to certain parks. I mean, the Black people in Cuba had a very distinct history. So I think in situations like that, we should acknowledge that those things happen as well. But even in places in DR, which has one of the most, we got a lot of African ancestry, the Black experience was very different. And you even saw that historically, because for, most of its history, the colony of Santo Domingo was on the poor side. You didn't see so much of that social status between white and Black people all the time. So in a lot of cases, it wasn't uncommon to see a white, poor campesino that was just as poor as their Black neighbor, So I think in situations like that, I feel like we need to kind of look at the individual histories as well.
Yeah, I'm all for that. And I think that's the thing we need to do. We need to have our own conversation about it. Our own conversation amongst Hispanos about it. Because again, some of the things that I've noticed when we have conversations, like when you have your panels, is like that. And I have nothing personal against Haitians. On the contrary, I met several Haitians. They're very impressive people. But their perspective comes with a historical gripe. And, it might be justified. But then they want to project that onto Dominicans, right? The same way that African Americans want to project their historical gripes on us. And I think you're absolutely right. I'd like to know more about what happened specifically in Cuba and at what times and how it developed in Dominican Republic. Because I think here's where we are now. This is part of the Momento Hispano, Cristina, is we're here now. Right, we're here now. Like, there might, have been some family drama a couple generations ago or whatever the heck, but we're here now. We're all marrying each other. We've all been mixing. We've been mixing since the beginning, but we've all been remixing and remixing and remixing ever since. So it's like, let's talk. I mean, we don't have a gripe. I don't see it embracing our African roots. I grew up around Mexicans who have a very small African admixture. But even among them, I never saw an issue with them embracing whatever African roots or whatever African influence in their music or their food.
And that's what's funny about it, because as much of a bad rap as Dominicans have for supposedly doing that, I didn't grow up around Dominicans doing that either. Because, the popular thing is, Dominicans love to deny their Blackness. And, like I've said a billion times, I'm not going to say that there aren't Dominicans that do that, because there are. Right. But for what I've experienced throughout most of my life, I never really saw that. So I feel like as much as people say that Hispanics in general love to do this, I feel like they're kind of a minority, the ones that do.
Totally. That's a total projection. And I think it comes from the Black American experience. And I think a Black American butts heads with a Mexican and they think, the Mexican's racist because I'm Black. But maybe the Mexican didn't even notice you were Black. I don't think that, again, I grew up in LA, and there are tensions between Hispanics and Blacks, right? Black Americans, not always. Obviously, we're friends too. Like, come on. But there has been issues. And Mexicans don't reject Black Americans because they're Black skinned. You just posted a video, very interesting. I want to touch on that. They reject Black Americans because of their cultural values. Just the same way that they reject white Americans. Because your culture, from a Mexican perspective, try to get into a Mexican, a peasant class, lower class Mexican, very hardworking, who came here through endless adventures, works 2-3 jobs as a business to support his family. And then all of a sudden, these loud Blacks are doing crazy shit in the streets. So what are people going to do? They're gonna be like, oh shit, got to be careful around these people. I mean, that's just humanity. But Black Americans make it about their skin color. But let's take that same Mexican man who was kind of apprehensive around the Black Americans, and let's bring Dominicans. Let's bring Dominicans from New York into LA, into a Mexican neighborhood in LA.
I don't know. They might say these loud Dominicans. I don't know. They might stereotype us the same way too.
they're gonna quickly try to flirt with the women, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, mommy, your hair is different." And you know these things that it's like little kids. You know how like little kids are, like they're very honest with each other. Like, "Oh, why is that man white? Or why is that man's eyes like this?" You know what I mean? It's like that. It's more of an innocent, but again, it's not this rejection because there's not this experience. There's not these stereotypes of grab your purse. You get what I'm saying? And I'm very real and honest about this stuff. Again, but it's not about race. I grew up with blacks, Mexicans, and whites. And there were, you know, and I grew up in a very Hispanic crew, right? In high school. I went to high school in a what you could call white neighborhood. But we had a couple Slav, Serbians, Croats in our crew, and we had a few Black Americans in our crew. And in a sense, they were all Hispanicized, right? Because that's the reality in LA. Everybody's Hispanicized to a certain extent. But, you know, we would go to like in the hood parties, right? These Mexican flyer parties where it would only be Hispanics and we'd have these two black guys with us. And we would be like, oh, he's Cuban. Okay. You get what I'm saying? Quickly, it wasn't like, oh, shit, who's this? Oh, tú eres cubano. You know what I'm saying? All of a sudden, the dynamic shift. And this is, I'm just thinking about my homie Jamal, and Jamal's black as black. He's Wesley Snipes black. But yet, why is it that as soon as the Mexicans thought he was Cuban, that tension went away? I thought the Mexicans hated black people.
Well, I mean, as messed up as it is, I mean, I can attest to that too. I've had experiences where, you know, people looking at me, they may think I'm, I don't know, African-American or African or whatever. But once they find out I'm Dominican, yeah, the attitude totally changes. And it's like kind of like, oh, you're one of us in a way. You speak Spanish. So, I mean, yeah, it happens, even though, I mean, it is kind of messed up. But I will say, I do think that does kind of back up what you're saying, and that it's not always necessarily about race. It's about there are perceived differences in our cultures. But I do have to say, a lot of times people are fed very negative stereotypes when it comes to African Americans, sometimes even before they get here. So they like to paint them all one way, which I think is unfair.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. You know, I'll tell you a story from my wife. My wife, I've mentioned my wife a lot on your show. My wife's mulata, right? And she's from Colombia, and she's been here going on 3 years now. Her stereotype of black people was like Soul Plane, right? Was like next Friday. She thought black people were all like funny all the time, just like really lighthearted, cracking jokes all the time, because that was the stereotype she had from watching American movies growing up. So when she got here, she was really excited to kind of connect with these influential people, because Black American culture is very influential around the world, right? Like the slang, the music. You know what I'm saying? Like they do have an influence around the world. So she was really excited to, in a sense, kind of bond with that. But once she got here, it was like she crashed into a wall because she felt rejected. Because all of a sudden she noticed that people were looking at her a certain way. Like, you know, I think there's a lot of issues with the hair thing, man. The hair thing kind of makes people grumpy. So if you got good hair, the ones without the good hair get a little gripe. But again, so is it about race? Is it about prettiness? Because you're not going to tell me that there isn't full-blooded dark chocolate black women that are gorgeous, right? We've all seen it.
Yeah.
And so again, what this forces us is to get that gradient out, because it's just been black and white. You've only had two colors. You've been on black and white television, and it's like now we have colored television. And so it's like let's really understand what's going on. Is it really because your skin is black you got rejected, or is it because of your perceived culture? Okay, is it because that stereotypes are being fed and portrayed a certain way? That works both ways. I just gave you an example of my wife, right? Where the assumption was that these people were very lighthearted and easygoing and funny and amicable. And the reality was very, very different. So I think once we start having this conversation in like really sincerely, it'll actually be good for the Black Americans and for the white Americans. Because again, they've only known themselves from themselves and this other one person's perspective, this black or this white person's perspective. I think it'd be helpful for both of them to hear it from a third party.
Mm.
I
I mean, that
think
makes
that's
sense.
probably what's transpiring.
Okay.
What? Tell me more about you. You have children. Are you married with a Dominican, or if you don't mind me getting a little bit in your business?
Yeah, no, I do have 2 kids. Their father, my subs-in-law, he actually passed away 4 years ago. But so he was half Dominican, half Panamanian, but he was like a darker skinned, Latino like me. But they came out looking very different. My youngest daughter, she looks Hawaiian. Okay, she doesn't even look like she's my daughter.
That's how my son looks like Samoan, or he looks Polynesian.
Seriously, yeah, people say like she looks like she's from like the Pacific Islands. She has very smooth hair, like probably like your texture hair. She's a little lighter, She looks like somebody that would probably have a lot of native. I'm like, she must have pulled that from the Panamanian side. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But then my older daughter, she looks a little more like me, like kind of more my hair texture. Mm-hmm. But yeah, those are my kids.
Now, your husband, he's Panamanian. Because in Panama, there was a lot of Jamaicans who came in. Was he Jamaican Panamanian, or was he Panamanian?
No, he was Panamanian. Actually, his grandmother was a Black Colombian. Mm-hmm. But his grandfather, though, looks very native, very indigenous.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he had a lot of indigenous, a lot of African blood from, his Dominican side, because his father was like a darker skinned, Black Dominican. And then, yeah. So I'm sure he was a big mix of everything, I'm sure.
Like all of us. And that's the thing. Again, like I like to point that if we have, because genetics works very interestingly, if you got a person who's like really blonde and white, like almost pink see-through, and you got with the darkest Black person from Africa, and they had kids, if they have enough kids together, there's going to be a kid who looks almost white as heck and almost Black as heck, who almost doesn't even look mixed. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you take that white-looking kid who hardly looks Black at all, and you mix him with maybe another kind of white-Black mixed person. All of a sudden, they might have 4 Black kids. Mm-hmm. So people get stuck on their DNA test, and they don't really understand how genetics works. Like when someone tells you, like, "Oh, I'm 70% European and 30% African," or whatever, but you have a white mom and a Black dad, and maybe your sister came out 30% European, 70% African. Does that mean you're more European than your sister, or more African or less African than your sister? No, that's just what you got in your genes to display themselves. But you still carry the same amount of Africa and the same amount of Europe as that person. And it just depends on who you mix with next, how those genes are going to express themselves. So people get a DNA test and they think like, oh, 17% of my ancestors were from Spain. No, that's just what you got in your mix. But it could be that 80% of your ancestors are from Spain. It's just what ended up in your cup. And it's like when you make chocolate chip cookies, and you throw the chocolate chips in, you're going to get a cookie that has a ton of chocolate chips, and you're going to get a cookie that has like 3 of them. But they're all chocolate chip cookies, right? And so it's like you're going to get randomly in a cookie what just happened. But that doesn't mean that you don't carry it. It doesn't mean that it's not going to express itself, which I think is a fascinating. I think we really need to embrace who we are, where we come from, both physically and metaphysically, right? Because it's a wonderful thing. I was talking to this Mexican guy who's more of like a white Indio type of mix, and he's like, he was like, what's better than having a girl with India hair and India skin with a white face and a Black girl's body? You know what I mean? And it's like, that's the stereotype of a fine Latina, ¿sí o no? So it's like, we need to, and we get it. That's, kind of being, guys being guys, being horny or whatever. Mm-hmm. but the point is that just as it expresses itself in a beautiful woman, it expresses itself in our souls and our personalities. We're very unique people in that, I have a lot of West African and East African friends, and there's a huge difference between East and West Africa. But there is a way that I can connect to my West African friends that's just like essential. And they recognize it too, because again, it's in you. It may express itself in some people, it may not, but it's in you, and it's metaphysical. You know what I'm saying? Hispanos are in a position where we can reach out to Africa, and we can reach out to Europe, and we can reach out to Asia, or obviously Native America, because that's also where we come from. And we should be able, in a sense, to kind of help the world get along. You get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
we should
think so, because we literally are like the world. We're this new mixed race of everything, you know. Yeah. So we're definitely in a unique position in that sense.
Yeah, and we need to embrace that. That's a huge strength, not just in our physical looks, but in our abilities. Like that means that I could go to Africa, and like somebody will hear me laugh, and they'll be like, "Are you black?" You know what I'm saying? Like, why are you laughing like that? And then you start to build rapport, and then, oh well, hey, now I bumped into a business opportunity that I never saw. You get what I'm saying? And the same thing with Europe. And it's like, are you Italian? That's what I get sometimes. And it's like, no, but hey, we could talk about why I might look Italian to you. You know what I'm saying? And then something transpires. That's a very unique position to be in. It makes us sociable people, because we have a lot to relate with different kinds of people. And that's a strength that we need to embrace. And again, one of the things that I try to push away is like, looking at the world racially is a very Germanic, Anglo way of looking at the world. When Spanish or the Romans, or however far back in history you want to go to that side of us, people never saw race as like this color thing. Race meant like your ethnic group, right? Like the Aztecs didn't think they were the same race as the Mayans. They were a different ethnicity, different language, different culture. There was even difference physically. Yeah, we may fall into this generic red color, but we're not the same people. Same thing. A Swede, right, a Norwegian, and a person from southern Spain ain't the same people. So we have to stop like adopting this racial worldview and really understand more of an ethnic worldview, because race is all about just blood related necessarily, but your ethnicity is more about like it's more like a metaphysical thing. It's more like your soul, your culture, right? It's like your vibrational level, if you want to get all hippie on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that culture supersedes race, because I feel like your culture or your ethnicity, whatever, I mean, your culture, that's where your values lie. That's where your traditions come from, your customs, your beliefs, your religion, all of that lies within your culture. So that's not to say that we can't also form bonds with people of our same race that are of different cultures, but I feel like it's just not necessarily the same connection that you have with your culture, because race is so broad. So
and how it's very, it's like tedious. It's like, you see this with whites all the time. It's like Spaniards aren't even considered white. Okay. So it shows you by the American government, Spaniards aren't considered white. It shows you some of this remnant of these historical tensions between these people, that whether we like it or not, we also are, we inherit from them, right? We're also descendants of these people. Even if maybe not completely genetically, but at least culturally we are, spiritually we are, right? Our language is that. Our essence comes, that's one of the main components of us. And the thing is that Americans make ethnicity race. They make it one, because again, in the Eastern Seaboard, in the rural South, you were either black or you were white. It made sense then. But we're not in 1840 Alabama anymore. So Black Americans need to realize themselves as an ethnicity. I think if Black Americans absorbed their ethnicity, they'd be a much stronger people. And I think white Americans need to do the same if that's what they want to do. But stop conflating and stop making everything in Europe white. No,
I was just gonna say though, I do think that that Black Americans, at least from what I have seen, they are moving a lot more towards seeing themselves as their own ethnicity. I mean, I think that a lot have, but it's different here in the US because your ethnicity and your race were made to be the same thing. You know, they're one and the same. Whereas, you know, Latin America, that's not the case. So it's just a very different experience. But yeah, no, I do think they're moving towards that though, if they haven't already.
I think that both, I say both gringos, whether they're black or white gringos, because the world's moved ahead. America's not what it used to be. The American dream is expired, you know, like the richest economies, the biggest cities, the center of power isn't America anymore. So the world's moving on, and like you're still holding on to this old shit, you know, and in order for you to feel significance in this world, and this is what blacks and whites do in America, you hold on to these like vague histories and connections to these random people who may be somewhat related to you and try to build your own identity with it. And it's like, no, just absorb what you are and start from there, build from that, but stop trying to dictate what it is to be black on other people and what it is to be white on other people. Again, I'm realizing how similar these people are. And I'll give you one really clear example to really show it. You know, the black Hebrew Israelites, right? The guys who are yelling in the street. That's right, those people. In their scheme of the 12 tribes, you know, and they say like, oh, Dominicans are like the tribe of Ephraim, and hey, you're Zebulon or whatever. Okay. In their scheme, the tribe of Judah, the royal tribe of Israel, is black Americans. I mean, how's that different from a Anglo gringo saying, oh, we're the real white people, and you're Italian, you're kind of white, but you're not the tribe of Judah white. You get what I'm saying? It's like, and so you see these things, how it's like these people really, and what it does, Christina, it creates taboos. When you tell your daughter, if you're a white dude and you tell your daughter, I never want to see you with a black man, never want to see you with a black man, never want to see you with a black man. And it comes to the point where she realizes like, he's not really looking out for me. He's just an insecure man. What do you think your daughter's going to do? She's going to get with a black dude. You created a taboo. Whereas in Hispanoamerica, those taboos don't exist, right? So then those fetishes don't arise. These weird sexual things. We got to be real. White and black people have a weird sexual thing for each other. And it's like they're coming to a point in their history where they're finally able to kind of mix without feeling so improper, like they were brought up to feel the whole time. And it's interesting, you know, it's interesting to see how like you guys seem to hate each other, but I'm saying once a Mexican comes into the picture, you seem to be both American, and then I'm seeing how you're talking crap about us because we mixed races, but yet you're not slowly, but steadily doing the same too, finally. So it's just telling. And again, it just confirms to me that the real dialectic, the real choice is not black and white, is gringo and Hispano. And those are not racial categories. Those are ethnic categories, cultural categories.
Oh man, I'm just thinking my comment section when I drop this video. Oh man.
I'll leave this note too. And because people might get, you know, the history's there. You look at the Buffalo Soldiers, there were blacks who persecuted and killed Indians for white people. You look at the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War, there was black soldiers killing black Cubans. Did they say, oh, wait, that's a black man that I'm about to shoot? No, they said that's a spick, that's a Spaniard, that's an Hispano. I don't care what race he is, he's not American. And somebody sent me the statistics from, I believe is the DOJ. And you look at the crime between these three groups. Did you know that Hispanos, okay, so black on black crime is huge. White on white crime is huge. Hispano on Hispano crime is smaller than gringos attacking Hispanos. You get what I'm saying? So Hispanos, when you get a victim of crime, for Hispanos, they're the only group out of these three who more than likely they got attacked by either a black or a white gringo. Okay, and when you compare it to how much Hispanos attack blacks or whites, for every one attack that an Hispano does against a white person, white people attack the Hispanos twice as much. And for every attack that an Hispano does on a Black American, Black Americans attack the Hispanos 3 times as much. So if we're going to be honest and we're going to have this dialogue, and I know a lot of it comes around like Black and brown unity, and I have to be, again, what are you saying? Like you own the copyright on Black? Because I have a Black wife. She doesn't program your way, right? We have a huge chunk of Black people and Black culture and Black mixtured people in Hispanoamerica. They don't program your way. They don't view the world the same way. It comes back to worldview. So, you know, I think we should dialogue with our neighbors. African Americans are our neighbors. White Americans are our neighbors, and we should have open and honest discussion, both positive and negative stuff. Let's be honest. We're all grown-ups here. We should all be able to have a dispassionate conversation with each other. But if you're going to talk about that, with ignoring these facts, ignoring how white and Black gringos attack Hispanos more than Hispanos attack themselves, you know? And when you look at the 2-to-1 with whites and the 3-to-1 with Blacks, then let's look at the this is a snapshot of the last 3 years, right? So let's look at these things and let's talk about it honestly. Why are Blacks attacking Hispanos? You know, is there something to be said about this? Well, we've been abused and downcast and all these things that we've suffered from white people. We want to kind of feel the same against these peasant farm workers that come here, because again, they overwhelmingly attack peasant farm workers. They don't attack the G's. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, what is that about? Why is there a bully dynamic developing here? You know, because it's going to add to the tension. But then again, that's kind of weird that when you put Blacks and white Americans together, they're both attacking us. And so here's all these people telling me about like, oh yeah, it's a racial reality and it's black and white and internalized racism and white supremacy and all these things that come from America. But yet we're the ones being attacked. I mean, statistically, we're the ones being attacked more than we're attacking even ourselves. So explain that. I think what it does when I gave you these historical examples, it just shows that the reality is that it's like high school, you know, like when the Mexicans and the whites are going to fight, the Blacks are going to be on the white people's side. They're going to come together like Voltron. I really do believe that, because they're realizing it's not so much about race. They're going to realize that, oh, there is a culture component. Oh, there is an ethnic component. There is a worldview component. I don't think it should be that way. I don't think we should fight each other at all. But that is kind of what you see. And I think if you look at it anecdotally, the conversation, I think Black Americans do feel like, hey, we were here first. And I don't know how you want to define that. You were on the Eastern Seaboard in the South first, but I mean, we live in Los Angeles, Texas, right? These places are Spanish, La Florida. So I don't know how you define first, but it's not about who was here first or not. Whether you were here first or second, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be in a position where you're abusing somebody for being weaker than you, right? We know that, right? That's kind of the whole thing of white supremacy and slavery, right? Is these power dynamics. So how are these power dynamics expressing themselves right now? And again, I think we're in a position, Christina, that because we're mixed, because we understand, because we have a different history, we are an outsider to this domestic dispute that the gringos are having with each other, the biracial gringo couple. That's how I look at it. It's a biracial gringo couple. And I'm with my mixed race wife, and they're fighting. We can hear them throwing shit at each other. My wife's like, should we go over there? Should we go over there? Let's help out. And I'm like, no. It's not our beef. And in fact, I want them to leave. I want them to move from the neighborhood. And this is just me being honest as an Hispano, because their kids are a bad influence on our kids. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I'm looking at it as an Hispano. There's a domestic dispute next door, and they're trying to get me to take a side. And I'm like, no. Both of you got issues. And what are those issues? Where are they rooted in? And so you have to look in history. You have to look into spirituality. And Hispanos are in a position to be able to help these people. At the same time, help ourselves. We need to know ourselves intellectually. We need to be able to explain ourselves to ourselves. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man. I'm just thinking like, man, people gonna have a field day with this interview. I get where you're coming from, and you know, the dynamic here between white and Black Americans, I mean, it is quite interesting. You know, I'm not gonna lie and say that it's not. And as far as Black Americans siding with white Americans when push comes to shove and kind of going against the Hispanic, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like that depends, because I feel like a lot of Black people do want that Black and brown unity, or to band with Hispanics against white people. So I think you probably I feel like you're gonna see Black people on both ends of that. I feel like you are gonna have the ones that do have kind of like this anti-Hispanic sentiment, because I've seen those. And if it came down to it, they might side with the white Americans against the Hispanic. But I feel like you also see a lot that would rather side with the Hispanic and against white people.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like you see both.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, again, that's a point, that's an opportunity for deeper conversation and discussion, because we shouldn't be vindictive. You know, we shouldn't, no human, you know, vengeance is of the Lord. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're not here to get even. You know what I'm saying? And you also see the dynamic with whites, where it's like, oh, the Hispanics are going to come and save us, and they're going to clean up shop. And I'm like, no, we're not going to solve your problem for you. This is your bed. You made it. You sleep in it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think this opens up a conversation. It's like, how do white Americans view the world, and how is it different from a Spaniard, you know, who came 150 years ago and looks like me now, or looks like you now? You probably have more Spanish. Right? Why is it that in just south of the border, just next door to you, that took place in that way, without those taboos and those fetishes? And then over here, you do have those taboos and those fetishes, and they express themselves violently. And it's just like, we gotta heal. We gotta move on. And I think they can use a slice of humble pie, both Black gringos and white gringos, because they have an imperialistic worldview. They want to define what it is to be white. They want to define what it is to be Black. And I'd rather them see themselves as just an ethnicity from Europe or an ethnicity from Africa, one of many. But they want to dictate it. They want to define it, because they have big country syndrome. You know, they don't realize that there's other countries in the world. So, you know, it's an interesting point in history, but I think there is a good opportunity for everybody here, where we can get away from this, man, because it is unfortunate what happened to, I think if you were, you know, let's be honest here, if you were a West African, you know, running through the jungle, fighting against this other tribe, and you got caught in a net and they took you to the coast and they sold you to a Sephardic trader and they put you on a boat, and you know, you luck of the draw. Am I going to end up in a Turkish port, a French port, an English port, a Dutch port, a Portuguese port, or a Spanish port? Let's be honest. If you had a choice right there, and being able to see history from this perspective, where would be the port you'd want to land? You would want to land in the Spanish port. That might be hard to admit, but that's the truth. Because, again, this is part of us having to discover our history. What was slavery like in Spanish colonial America? How many slaves were there? What rights did they have? Because they had rights, especially when you compare it to the Anglos or even the Portuguese, who are very similar to us, right? So, you know,
I mean, again, I think that varies a lot by country.
Well, no, I don't know. I know the slavery laws were the same everywhere. I mean, one of the phenomenons that you have in Hispanoamerica is the cimarrones, right? Palenques, there was black cities, okay, where's a black city in the United States that blacks founded and that they were allowed to found and thrive and have their own communities in from very
during
early
slavery?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about during slavery. I only know of some after slavery was abolished, but those got burned down. So
yeah, exactly. I think there's like the Gullah Geechee or something. They're kind of a people that kind of broke away, and like the English said, whatever, just let them. But that happened a lot in Hispanoamerica. You know, that happened everywhere. Because to be honest, we don't have to get into it, you know, here, but the crown was never really with slavery. But there was a commercial class who really wanted it. But it never kicked off the same way. It's just a reality. It never did. And this is why we look the way we look. You know what I mean? And this is why our music is the way it is. And this is why our swag and our attitude and our joie de vivre is the way it is. Because we're a fusion, you know? We're a fusion of, we talked about it, the Congo drums, the accordion, right? Like, we're a fusion. That's salsa music, right? It's a fusion of all these other fused musics. Mm-hmm. That's who we are. And I think it's time we fully embrace that, work out all the kinks and all the resent that might be there, all the misconceptions or misunderstandings historically, which, again, our enemies have programmed our brains to have these misconceptions. And they've done it because they don't want you to feel like there's 4 of you to 1 of me. They don't want you to feel that way, because the moment you realize that during, you know, the Spanish Empire, 70% of world GDP went through Mexico City. And you start realizing, well, why the hell are we so broke now? Mm-hmm. They don't want you to question these things. You know, they want you to play the chess board that they set up for you, as opposed to playing your own game. And I think we're at a point historically that we're ready to play our own game. We're grown up. We're 22 now. We're in our 20s now. We're at the peak of our age and energy. We're ready to marry. We're ready to start businesses. We're ready to conquer. Whereas for the gringos, the white gringos, it's kind of the twilight. It's kind of like, you know, we're approaching the end of the day here. Now, that shouldn't be like, oh shit, the Mexicans are gonna kill me. No, that's not what we're saying. But again, the world has kept spinning, right? The world has kept spinning, and you're not the big man on the block anymore. You're the old man on the block. And I think Hispanos really need to view themselves as that. We need to view ourselves as the 3rd biggest ethnicity in the world, right? After Indians and Chinese, it's Hispanos, Hispanoamericanos. We're a huge block of people.
Yeah.
Business as usual can't continue on, you know, and that's El Momento Hispano. That's where we're at.
Gotcha.
So I've been on Twitter. It's really where I kind of developed my platform, and I'm on like my 6th account. I don't even have an account right now because they just stay banning me. They'll let Antonios and they'll let the rad Latinos keep their accounts, but when somebody's embracing all their roots, they ban them, Interesting. So I can't even open an account. But anyways, I've been on Twitter. So I came across Andy's one of his videos or something, and somebody's like, hey man, this guy, and I had already done a couple podcasts like as a guest for podcasts from Hispanoamerica, right? In Spanish language podcast. Just kind of sharing with them kind of what's going on in America, because this was at the peak of the riots. And so I reached out to Andy, not really knowing that I thought Andy was trying to like vindicate our Spanish root, which is what I'm all about, right? I'm about vindicating all our roots: Black, Spanish, Indian, Middle Eastern, Asian, whatever. If you have those 2, hey, the more the merrier. So I didn't know Andy had a problem admitting he's Black. And if you listen to the conversation with me and him, I've never changed my position. And the conversation there, like, I thought he had a thing. Again, he realized the cultural differences. I didn't know it was racial. I didn't know he had this internal hang up about like, I don't want to accept my African ancestry, which I think is really silly and pathetic. You know what I mean? Because it's like, my nigga, you look like Steve Curry. Like, you look like a blonde Black guy. You know what I mean? Like, cut it out. Like, but then you have the inverse or the converse with ¿cómo se llama? Rad Latino, right? And he's like, oh, the Spanish were all rapists, and we have to deny like our Spanish ancestry. And it's like, you're retarded. First of all, the conquest period was, at most a 30, 40-year period. Most of us who have Spanish ancestry didn't come from the conquistadors, who, by the way, I don't think they were all that bad. I mean, they were badass dudes. But again, some of them were African. Hey, let's talk about that. They weren't all Spaniards. But most of us come from, middle class, lower class Spanish peasants who came here. Like you said, they were too broke to do anything. So they married the black girl down the street. That's where we come from. Most of us come from these people. So to portray these people as racist and white supremacists, and again, both of these are just, to me, gringo bullshit. I don't care if it's black or white, is gringo. You get what I'm saying? And it's like, nah. This guy's calling me a white supremacist. This guy's saying that I cook for the blacks or whatever, the way he frames it. They're both trapped in the false dialectic. They're both mind trapped, and they're both pawns on somebody else's chessboard. They don't see it that way, but that's what they are. They're both contributing to the division of the four into ones. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so that's why Andy's a pick me. He's like, pick me, Mr. White Man, pick me. I want to be on your team. And Rad Latino is a Latinxer, right? He's trying to say, oh yeah, well, we're victims of systemic racism and white supremacy. And it's like, you're not a Black Panther. You don't have the Black American experience. It's a unique experience. Stop taking their experience from them. And stop assuming that your experience was the same as theirs. That's a disservice to both of your ancestors. Which, by the way, even like genetically, like we're very different, right? Like the African slaves that came to Hispanoamerica were not the same African slaves that came to Anglo-America. They're actually different ethnic groups. They came from different regions of Africa. This is something that's not even talked about. Again, we're just assuming all Africa is just Bantu. No, not all Africa is just Bantu. But again, yeah, so that's the Latinxer and that's the pick-me. They're both victims of the false dialectic. They're both pushing lines that are basically seeking to divide these four young men who are poised to grab the world. The world's in their hands. That's the reality. Whether Black Americans have a problem with it or white Americans have a problem with it, the world's in our hands, demographically speaking. This hemisphere is in our hands, demographically speaking. And what I'm about is waking these people up so that they realize it, embrace it, not for vanity or power's sake, but to see the burden of responsibility, the fact that God, whatever you want to call it, the universe, is placing these people at this moment, in this situation, in this position. And I believe there's a reason for it. And I think it's a positive reason for it, for most people. Like I said, I think we're in a position to actually help the world reconnect and heal, and we got to get over it. We got it. I'm not saying just ignore it. No, let's lay it out on the table. Let's go through our history. Let's go through all those injustices. Let's go through all those weird quirks that throw that usual line of black versus white out the window. Clearly, that's not how history operated. Let's become more informed. Let's become more educated. Let's become more nuanced. And I think that's one of the things you might have observed from my podcast, that there's a lot of nuance. It's not just black and white. We're watching color television.
Yeah. No, that's something I've said too in the past. Like especially when it comes to history, most of history is not just black and white. And when it comes to the nuances and stuff, it's like it's almost taboo sometimes to even talk about it. Yeah, but it's things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, we're all grown-ups here, man. We're all adults. Let's just be frank. Let's be candid with each other. Let's give ourselves and each other the respect to be adults. And I think that's one of the things that I'm realizing is that, the Russians have Russian school, right? They send their kids to the Russian school on Sunday or Saturday, and the kids learn Russian and Russian culture and literature. And the Vietnamese have Vietnamese school, and the Chinese have Chinese, and the Indians have Indian. But the Hispanos, we don't have schools. We're letting our historical enemies educate us. We need to have our own schools. We need to learn that cultural history. We need to have a mastery over our language. Excuse me. We need to see ourselves as a united ethnic group. And the reality is America is helping us see ourselves as a united ethnic group, because we're realizing, oh, this shit doesn't fit me. I'm not black and I'm not white. That's not what I am. Even if I am black and white, you get what I'm saying? Like it doesn't come down to that. What was another thing you had mentioned in your list there?
The Dominican podcast.
Oh yeah, you see, that was another thing with Dominican Renaissance. It's like, and I saw a picture. Have you seen a picture of this guy?
Yeah, I mean, he used to show his face in his videos, so a lot of us know what he looks like.
Yeah, I didn't even know that either. He's just been saying, like, "Hey, you're kind of mean to them." He says that I'm against Dominicans. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why would I have anything against Dominicans? But again, I'm seeing these dynamics. Like I said, I understand why some people might fall into that black and white trap, because they're thinking about Haiti and Dominican, and so Haiti's black and Dominican Republic is white.
Yeah, which I wanted to ask you about that too, because I remember you saying that you know, Dominicans, we have a unique racial thing or issue, which I agree we do. Yeah. But I guess when you said that we kind of imposed that on the rest of Latin America, that's why I was kind of like, how do we do that? Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of like it sounded like you were kind of implying that the rest of Latin America doesn't have racial hangups, which I mean it does. So I was just wondering, how do Dominicans do that? No,
what I meant was that dialectic, that black and white dialectic that you see in America and Anglo America, you see it, a different version of it in Hispaniola, right? Because there is two choices: you're either Haitian or you're Dominican, and we're going to associate black with Haiti, and we're going to associate white with Dominican Republic. And so that's what I meant, where it's like clearly a mulatto is telling me he's white, and I'm like, ¿de dónde? You know what I mean? Like, you might be white on your island, but once you come to the mainland, we're going to be like, hey, negro, ¿cómo estás, mijo? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So, and again, that's very unique to the Dominican Republic. So that's what I meant. It's that, and so then, but you also have the Latinxer side, like Rad Latino, where it's like, oh, the white man bad, white man bad, white man bad. And it's like, man, I've met Dominicans online through this whole experience, and it's just like, I'm about to rip my hair out with these people. Like,
oh God.
Can't you just be chill? Can't you just say, hey, you know, I'm proud of being Spanish, as I am proud of being Indian, as I am proud of being Lebanese, as I'm proud of being African. Thank God for every drop of blood in me. And that's really what I'm trying to offer people, that we don't have to fall into this dialectic. We can be thankful for every single drop of blood in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Okay. Okay. You guys definitely touched on a bunch of interesting things. That podcast was entertaining and eye-opening, yet frustrating all at the same time. Listen. Yeah, there are a few moments I was just like, oh my God. But yeah.
Yeah, you saw me, you heard me too, man. I'm just like, oh, dude, you can't embrace your African roots. Like, man, why wouldn't you? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just it adds to the mystique, to the swag, to the flavor, to the soul. I mean,
it does.
Why wouldn't
what makes us unique, man?
Yeah, why wouldn't you embrace that? Why wouldn't you make it work for you? Why are you making it a drag on your shoulder that you're like, oh man, I gotta be black today? Like, come on, dude. Don't be retarded, bro. Come on, embrace it, own it, make it work for you. And that's what that's the Hispano experience, making it work for us. It doesn't matter what race, it doesn't matter what socioeconomic class. I got something that the little rich white kid that goes to private school doesn't have, and he knows it. You know what I'm saying? And I'm proud of it, and I'm gonna enjoy it. And that's the Hispano experience. Go to Latin America. That's the experience of people.
That's why the white Latinos got that flavor. I'm just saying.
It's true. You can't take it away from them either. You know that I really hate these tensions, these dialectics, man. That I'm seeing. I'm seeing the alchemy. I'm seeing the Anglo white voodoo working in Hispanoamerica and dividing people in ways that, like, we don't divide ourselves, man. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. You're spending too much time on the internet, on the American side of the internet, if that's how you're viewing the world. Yeah.
It's crazy. And, you know, growing up in the United States and being raised here, it is kind of a unique position we're in because we grow up in between both of these worlds, so to speak. And I think especially depending how you look phenotypically, it is very easy to fall into the dichotomy, especially if you, like in my case, you know, I'm obviously more visibly African descent. So it is easy for me to, you know, if I allow myself to fall just into like the black side of this dichotomy.
Yeah. And that's risk. That's risky, man. Because then what you do is you're disserving your black ancestry. Because you're making your black ancestry the Anglo African ancestry. That was not their experience. That was not their worldview. That's not how they live. That's not how they dealt with life. And it's like those people deserve being honored and respected, just like the African American people deserve to be honored and respected. Their ancestors deserve to be respected. And you can't just conflate them because they're black or because they had an experience with slavery. Like the reality is, again, we need to zoom out historically here, man. Everyone's been a slave of somebody. The English were slaves to the Romans. And guess where the Romans are swimming today, or where that Roman legacy and blood is swimming today? It's swimming in you and me via the Spanish. Okay. So what? We're gonna have Anglos come up to us and say, "Hey, you owe us reparations because you enslaved us in 340 BC," and it's like, no, that's not. Come on. Everybody's been through this. Everybody's been through this. I'm not trying to minimize it, but we need to just realize that, yeah, man, you know, one day I'm at the bottom. One day you're going to be at the bottom. The world keeps spinning, man. The world keeps spinning. Where's the demographic center of the world right now? It's Africa. They're the ones reproducing. They're the ones having 6 kids still. God bless them. The future of the world is in Africa, whether you like it or not. So, you know, again, you got to zoom out. I think people really need to have an understanding for providence. Providence means that out of a man's evil, God will create a greater good, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he ended up becoming the viceroy of Egypt. That ended up saving his whole family from starvation.
Yeah.
We see, our people have an understanding of that. De las desgracias vienen buenas cosas. You know, and that's why do we have that perspective? And those are interesting things to look into. But yeah. Dominican Renaissance, I thought that was pretty pathetic, to be honest. It's just why wouldn't you embrace it? You know, like. But hey, that everybody's got retards. We said this earlier.
Oh my gosh. Yo, my comment section. Oh my God.
What about you, Christina? Because I mean, I came across yours. Somebody was recommending your stuff in the comments. Mm-hmm. It seems like you have quite a following, obviously, and you started doing like makeup stuff, but then now you're like in the limelight of like kind of this whole Hispanic Latino, especially with in the cross section with African Americans. Tell me about that experience, and that's because now you're like in a different position than when you started this whole thing, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So like you said, I started my channel with makeup, and I slowly started making my way into talking about all this stuff after I posted my DNA results. Because then Dominican DNA results. Oh man. So after that,
can you share with me what are those, by the way? I'm just curious, roughly.
Actually, I just got the updated results, but so according to that, I am 53% now sub-Saharan African, like 37% European, then like 2% North African, and then the rest was indigenous. So like 7% indigenous, something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm pretty split, you know, half black and then half everything else.
Yeah. Big chunk is European. That's a big chunk of European.
Yeah.
Even the North African, that's kind of more North African, Southern European, the Mediterranean basin. Those people kind of are all
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because it used to be 40% European, but I think they took that North African and they kind of made it its own. Yeah, I think that's what happened there. It was a little surprising, but then again, I don't know. I mean, my mom's dad was Spanish, like he was a criollo, so, and then my dad has some European blood in him too, so, and they both did their ancestry results, and yeah. So, anyways,
yeah.
So after that
happened.
I got a lot more subscribers after that. So I was like, oh crap, most of these people probably didn't subscribe to me for makeup. They subscribed because of my DNA video. So I was like, so let me start doing some more like Dominican topics and stuff like that. And then eventually I branched off into, talking about either social issues or again, like Dominican topics and, to more Hispanic Latino topics. And yeah, I pulled in both Hispanic, but also a lot of African-American followers or subs, whatever. So, which is kind of like my real life experience also, because like, to be honest, the majority of my friends growing up were Black, be they American or African, mainly Sudanese. So I've always grown up around, a lot of Black people. So, and, being darker complected myself, it's not surprising to me that happened. So a big part of my mission, I guess you could say, initially was to kind of bridge the gap of understanding, if I could, between, us Dominicans specifically and African Americans, because, I definitely noticed that tension online. So I was like, okay, let me see if I can kind of help African Americans understand where we're coming from when it comes to either racial identification or why we say certain things. But also, if I can shed a little light from what I know into the African American experience, I'll try to do that too. So that was kind of like where I was at for a bit in the beginning. And, I did get trolled a lot, but it is what it is. And but now I've kind of expanded more past just speaking about Dominicans and like bringing in other Hispanics as well, and having them share their experiences. And then, I started doing my cultural historical videos on different cultures throughout Latin America and different genres of music. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. So yeah, it's interesting though, because I feel like a lot of times I'm like, it's like people try so bad to push me to one side. Yeah. And it's like I've tried to maintain, and sometimes a more of a neutral or more like a moderate stance on some things, but it's like, no, people either want to push me to like, it's like, oh, you're too pro-Black, or it's like you're not pro-Black enough. It's always centered around Blackness. Like,
that's irritating.
I'm never enough for some of these people. I'm too much over here. I'm not enough to this side over here. So I'm like, it is what it is. I can't please everyone. So that's where I'm at.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. You grew up, in Virginia. So, I just wonder what it would be like if you grew up in Miami or LA, more in a Hispanic region where don't
get me wrong, there's a lot of Hispanics here, but they're Central American, so they don't naturally gravitate towards me.
Yeah. Well, they probably assume you're African American.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't really mesh with them a lot.
It's not
when I was younger.
It's not a Hispanic area. There's a Hispanic community, but it's not a Hispanic. It's not Miami and it's not LA.
Yeah.
Southern Texas, where it is a Hispanic, these are Hispanic cities. So I just wonder what that would be like, because I think the dialectics, the tensions change a bit, and it's not because these cities, whether they're part of the United States, they're essentially culturally part of Hispanoamerica, and they operate more like Hispanoamerica, where it's like not black and white. It's like there's these 12 shades in between these two extremes. And so then it doesn't really matter what your skin color is. It matters more about who your family is and what, access and money you guys have. So it becomes more socioeconomic. It's just curious.
Yeah.
And you haven't had a guest from Miami?
I don't think any of them were from Miami.
Yeah, we got to find someone.
I think so.
Because I want to hear them. I was just in Miami, so that's what I'm asking. And
okay.
I'm just like, I really like the place. It's really nice to see an Hispano majority city, and you know, it's not the biggest city in the world, but it's a nice city. It's a clean city. It's a relatively peaceful city, and and it's nice to see that Hispano essence just in all its
glory.
Yeah, exactly. You see it all. You know what I'm saying? And so now you see how the it's not black and white. It's Hispano and Gringo. And Gringo, whether black or white, are very small, you know, portion of the population compared to there's like 80% Hispanos there.
Yeah.
So
I imagine that would have been a very interesting experience having gone up there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I wonder who I would have kind of gravitated more toward.
It wouldn't. I don't think it would have been so racial. It would have been more socioeconomic. It would have been more about class and, like, you know, what school or do your parents have a profession? Are they doctors? Are they lawyers? Are they real estate brokers? Are they gardeners? Do they flip burgers at McDonald's? You know, that's really the stratification. We're more of a class-based people in Hispanoamerica than we are race-based. And that needs to be understood, man. That needs to be understood.
Yeah, no, I've mentioned that before too, that class plays a huge role, sometimes more than race. And actually, I asked my mom about this because, you know, I've mentioned a billion times how my parents never really talked about race, but I did finally ask my mom like 2 months ago, like, what was her experience growing up at Gombe? She grew up in the campo, okay?
Yeah.
Up in the mountains in the middle DR. But I asked her, like, what was her experience when it came to race? Or was it something that people talked about? And she was like, eso no se usaba. Like, nobody talked about race. And I guess because they were all poor, they were all in the same situation. Her criollo father was poor as hell too, you know? So, and that's how she grew up. She said it wasn't until she moved out of the campo and into the main pueblo where you started to see more of those class separations that you also did kind of start to see more like that color or racial dynamic come into play. But it was, again, very associated with your class or your social standing. So, yeah. So, I mean, I definitely feel like classism plays a huge role.
Huge. My wife said the same thing. She's like, I mean, I always know I was black. Soy la negra, right? En la familia. Colombians don't see race. Like, I explain it to people. It's more complexion, you know? It's like skin complexion. It's like you're tan or you're olive or you're dark or you're red. But we don't look at it like you're scientifically a different species from me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not how we work down there. And Nicaragua was really interesting. You asked me in the beginning of the conversation. In Nicaragua, I remember I was really impressed one summer as a young man. You know, I'm spending American dollars going to the nightclubs over there, having a blast. And I'm driving home, you know, 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like in this intersection and there's this little white girl, blonde hair, green eyed, you know, curly blonde hair, asking for money at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of Managua. And I'm just like,
wow.
I didn't think about her race. You know, I'm just looking back now. I remember she was a little white girl with green eyes. And then I think about, like, you know, El Negro from Bluefields, who owns a fleet of ships and sends his kids to school in Miami. You know, he owns a fleet of fishing ships in Bluefields, and he sends the kids to Miami. And is it racial? You know what I'm saying? It's not so racial. It's more about socioeconomic class. And though there might be some rough correlation with color, it's not necessary, at least not in Nicaragua. You know, Indios have money, Negros have money, whites have money, and whites can be poor just like everybody else. Like, there's no such thing as white privilege. You know what I'm saying? There's pretty privilege. There's good looking privilege, of course. You know what I mean? If you're a handsome, good looking girl or man, your people are going to smile at you. But no one's saying, oh, what race is that person? Okay, they're white. Yeah, let me smile at them now. That's not the way it works down there. And I think it's more sensible. You know, I had a conversation with some, like, kind of these white nationalists. They're not white supremacists. They're just white people who want to have in the United States, who feel like, hey, you know, we're white. We embrace our heritage too. Like, Why can't we have our own corner? You know what I'm saying? And I can respect that. I can have a conversation with you about that. And they realize once I talk to them, they're like, shit, man, that makes so much more sense. You know, that way that things operate down there, it makes so much more sense. You're not saying that somebody's worthless because of a quasi scientific classification. It's more, that's the thing. It's more about their calidad, right? That's something that the Spanish, when you got baptized, they didn't just ask about what casta, they asked about your calidad, right? Was your dad prominent? That was more important than your casta, than your color, which was very cerebral. And, you know, the priest who filled in your form after you got baptized just kind of put whatever he thought. It wasn't, that wasn't the key. The key was calidad, that little spot in the form that talked about your ancestry and your family and your dad was prominent or your mom came from money or something. That was way more important. And that's the reality to this day. Though again, not always, but in the case of Nicaragua, it's not racial at all. It's not racial at all.
It is very interesting. I mean, even in the case of DR, you know, the mulatto population, you know, pretty quickly came to match and surpass that of the white population, you know, and even in Dominican history, you see that people were able to kind of move around these racial boundaries and even identify as Spanish, even if you were very clearly mulatto or whatever the case was, and your class had a lot to do with that too. So it's just very interesting. I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, these classifications, they were always very loose when it comes to most Latin American countries. And that's why you can kind of move in and out of different racial classifications or whatever it was. And why you had people that were, again, they were not white, but they were still identified as Spanish.
You had rich, powerful black men own vast estates with black and Indian servants and slaves. You had cacique indios with white page boys, right? Basically white slaves. You know, you had all these things. It wasn't black and white. It wasn't black and white. That's definitely what it wasn't. And I think we're in a privileged position because all this history is coming out. Like we can now find out really what it was like. We don't have to take the lies from people anymore. We can. The historical records are there. You know, our churches are ancient. They've been for 500 plus years in the same spot. These buildings exist that long, and those records are there. And you can see how somebody was born a mulatto and all of a sudden he died a Spaniard. You know, if you follow his paper trail, and it's like, how did that happen? And so then now you're starting to, you know, paint the picture and realize like, okay, this is interesting. This is definitely worth investigating, finding out, understanding, because it helps explain why we are where we are, you know?
Yeah, no, it's definitely very interesting. But would you say though that maybe like to an extent that also might have contributed to why you do sometimes see that kind of denial of the African or indigenous roots, because people were able to move from being, you know, mulatto or mestizo to being Spanish?
Yeah, I think so. Because again, the Spanish, the king was Spanish, right? So it's like you wanted to be what the king was. But I think if history had gone on and the revolutions didn't happen, I don't think it would have been far-fetched to assume that there'd been a Native American emperor of the Spanish Empire. I mean, if you look at Rome, if you look at the history of Rome as an example, which is very extensive history, the Romans weren't always emperors. There was Arab emperors. There was, you know, North African, Hispania, Slavic emperors, you know. So Spain being the Spanish Empire, because Spain, what Spain is today is not the Spain that conquered us, right? Those are the people who stayed back. The people who conquered us are us. You know, there's this funny joke that it was like a Mexican woman and a Spanish woman, and they're having a conversation, and the Mexican woman's like, "You people," to the Spanish woman, "you people came here and you conquered us," and she's like, my people stayed in Spain. The ones who came and conquered you are you are your people, right? So we have to stop looking at Spain like it was this big thing. Like, no, Spain is just a Cuba, it's a Mexico, it's a Peru. It's just another little piece of this empire that was. And this empire that was itself kind of a remnant of Rome, right? It carried on that Roman legacy after Rome was broken up into pieces, right? The Spanish kind of picked up that banner and said, like, we're the Western Rome. And that's really where they came from. I mean, the mestizaje didn't just happen here in the Americas. It happened in the Iberian Peninsula. You know, Spaniards are a mix of people. Maybe the mix isn't as drastic as our mix, but they're a mix of people. And the Roman part played the role of the Spanish part for us, right? It was more of the paternal kind of root, right? It was the language, right? We speak Spanish. It comes from the vulgar Latin. That's the language of the Romans. So you see how it's kind of like an echo of what happened before. So, you know, to get back to your point about, you know, you're right. There may have been this kind of upward pressure. It's like, well, the more Spanish I am, the more access I'll statistically have. And I think that's fair. But again, let's not make that a racial designation, right? Let's not use American contemporary lenses to view this part of history, because they didn't necessarily view themselves racially.
Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, it's not racial, because if you're clearly black or whatever, but you're being put on paper as Spanish, yeah, I mean, at that point, it's not about race anymore. It's more like a class type of thing.
Yeah, what you're calling is that Spaniard was like the designation for citizen, right? Like you were a Roman citizen after a certain point, right? Like the Romans came, they beat you up, they made you people slaves. But, you know, after a while, you'll be an intern in the company. Eventually, you'll grow up and you'll be Roman just like us. And maybe one day you'll be CEO. That was the Roman program. And they came wherever they went, and they intermarried with the women and they mixed with the women. The Spanish did not invent this. They just inherited from their Roman daddies. You feel me? And so Roman became, I'm a Roman. Yeah, I was born Egyptian, but I'm a Roman. Why? Because I'm a Roman citizen now. I have the full access and privilege of a person born in the city of Rome. Same thing happened here, where now Spaniard, soy un mulato, but no, yo soy español, right? That's what my paperwork says. So I have all the full access rights and privileges, and I can take people to court, and you know what I'm saying? Like, so again, we have to get away from this contemporary racial dynamic that's very unique to the United States, and understand that the world's way bigger than the East Coast of the United States and the rural South of the United States. The world's way bigger than that. Way bigger. And I think understanding that is going to be good for Hispanos. It's going to be good for African Americans. It's going to be good for white Americans too.
Honestly, I feel like if we just took the time to actually try and understand each other's histories, and, you know, this goes both ways, I feel like it would just make things so much more easier, to where it wouldn't be like this huge tension and this whole us trying to dictate who the other person is or how they view themselves and their history. Like, y'all, we need to, you know, if you're going to examine Latin America, you need to take your American lens off. Like, you just have to. But the same goes the opposite way. If you're going to examine the United States, then you got to put the American lens on, you know. But it's like people sometimes don't know how to switch on and off between both of those two things, you know. Sure. But that's again a unique thing that us Hispanics born in America have, though, because we kind of grow up in between both. So hopefully you are able to see both sides and take that lens on and off when needed. Yeah.
And again, I think it's helpful for Americans, whether they're black or white, to finally hear it from a third party, because they only hear it from each other. They only hear it from blacks if you're black, or they hear it from whites if you're not, and vice versa. But they never hear it from somebody who's not either. And I think it's only going to help them to hear it. It's only going to help them get a better understanding of themselves. And, you know, and I think one of the reasons why people can't dig into that history or can't have these conversations is because we're too stuck in emotion. And this is why I got so pissed off when Radical Latino came on and he started using certain words, because it's like, I see the magic you're doing. Because there's certain words that automatically you hear them and you get a physiological reaction, and it just makes you emotional. You're no longer having a conversation between two sane human beings. Now it's just an emotional shit show. And I think that's unfortunate, and it really irritates me on the part of Black Americans. I feel bad. I don't want to say I feel bad for them, but I feel pissed off for them. You get what I'm saying? Like, because this constant like slavery black, slavery black, slavery black, slavery black, as if like those are they're not mutually exclusive things. Like, there's more to Africa than the slave trade. Okay, in that experience, there's more to being black than being the descendant of a slave. Again, if you go far back enough, everyone's a descendant of a slave at some point. Very few people aren't, and those dynamics are always changing. But it irritates me because it's like you don't let Black people heal from their experience and their frustrations in this country, because you're constantly reminding them of how they were whipped. You get what I'm saying? It's like, and that's like such a white trick to me. It's like, oh, you know how white people like that stereotype of like they feign politeness, but they're really kind of jabbing you from underneath. You get what I'm saying? That's what they do. It's like, oh yeah, we African American history, but let's remind you of how we abused the shit out of you. You get what I'm saying? And it's like, how's a person going to heal? How's a person going to get through it? How's a person going to come to terms and get closure and feel like an autonomous adult now? It's really hard when they're constantly reminding you of it. But Black people have to see how they're doing that to themselves too, and how they might fall into that trap. And they have to see that there's more to Africa than the slave trade. And whether the history of that wasn't, there wasn't these huge, magnificent cities in Africa before the Europeans came, who cares? We're here now. Go to Kenya, go to Nairobi, go to Tanzania. These places will impress the shit out. Go to Ethiopia, go to Nigeria, go to Ghana. You get what I'm saying? It's like people got to zoom out. They got to zoom out. They got to step out of their shoes. They got to take their lenses off, and they got to see how some of these things might work. You might think that they're doing you a service, but there might be secretly jabbing you underneath. And I think ultimately what I would like to see is just people healing. You know what I'm saying? Like, everybody's been a victim of somebody at some point. We got to heal. Nobody is more righteous than anybody else. We're all fallen. We're all humans. We can be the biggest pieces of shit to each other, and we can be extremely magnanimous. And we gotta move on. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is what year is it? 2020. We should be partying with each other, rather than trying to kill each other and hate each other and beat each other up and do all this stuff. I think it's frankly a little pathetic, but it's where we are.
Yeah. You're right about that. I talked to like a few different people who put things in a different perspective for me now, and they remind me how all of this racial war and racial tension and this versus that is all like a distraction from who's really behind the scenes and what's really going on in the world. Which, some people consider them like conspiracies, but it's like you said, when you really start to zoom out, it really does help to put things into perspective. But like I said, this is where we're at right now. So we have our moments where it's like, yeah, we kind of come together, but then the next we're back at each other's throats. So it's like a continuous toxic cycle that we just find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think the key for people, if you really want to break away from that, is just see what makes you emotional, whether angry or guilty or resentful. If something's making you feel something, be careful with it. Analyze it. What is that feeling? Because when you're lost in your feelings, you're gonna be manipulated by somebody who's playing the flute. You get what I'm saying? But when you're clear of mind and you're clear of heart and you're clear of spirit, and you can see things dispassionately, that's what you want to follow. You know what I'm saying? When somebody's luring you with these words and this energy, be careful, whether it's good or bad, because if somebody might be giving you a really good feeling, like dope, right? But then comes the hangover the next day. So you want to stay away from emotion emotional appeals and emotional feels. You want to be rational. You want to be clear-minded. You want to be spiritually clear and sound, because that's when you can make clear adult decisions. You know what I'm saying? But when you're being manipulated, when you're being drawn emotionally and you feel angry or you feel guilty, then somebody's probably playing a trick on you. And it's probably a human at some point, but there's the enemy of us all. You know what I'm saying? From the very beginning. And he's a master of tricks, and it's real, man.
Yeah. Well, Noel, we are now at 2 hours.
Yeah, had a good time, fun time. This is great. You know, I really have to commend you for the initiative you've taken, because it's been like a domino effect, you know, and it's nice to see the conversation expand beyond, you know, the Andy and the Rad Latino, and, you know, you're contributing to the mix and I'm contributing to the mix, and all the guys who have connected with me are contributing to it. This is good. These are conversations that we've waited 500 years to have as a people, you know, and it's about time we start having them so we can point the boat in the right direction, and our grandkids and our great grandkids could benefit from that.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Well, to everyone listening, this concludes this here interview. So I will leave the link to Noel's channel in my description box and also in the comments. I guess I can't really link your Twitter right now because you don't have one at the moment. Yeah, so no Twitter. And you're not on Instagram, or are you on Instagram?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I need to get on the social media. I'm getting there. I got a lot of things going on at the same time.
Yeah. Well, if anyone has any questions for Noel, definitely leave them in the comment section below. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of opinions concerning some of the things that we talked about. So hopefully nothing was too triggering.
I'm sure there was, but whoever got triggered, you know, and I leave this open to anybody who's listening. I'm more than happy to have you on. We can share. We can get on a voice call or a video chat. And we should be able to have these discussions no matter what experience or what side of the camp you're from. You know, I'm friends to all honest people, regardless of color. Like I can't live a color view because, you know, my wife is a color, my son's a color, my mom, my dad, like it doesn't work that way. So whatever experience you have, if you disagree with something, or maybe you kind of disagree, but whatever it is, and you want to expand on it, I'm more than happy to reach out and have a discussion, you know, as close to face as we can. Adult human beings of equal dignity that we all are.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Noel. Yeah. Well, you know, hopefully I can have some more live streams and you can hop on, and everybody definitely go check out Noel's channel. So again, thank you, and I'll check everyone in my next video. Bye-bye.
Bye.